Once the coast was clear, Crimson did not hesitate to vomit from the smell of the horrible content below him. The metal restraints hurt him as he lunged forward from the force of his body, extracting the vomit. As much as it hurt him, he didn't care. The smell below him was too putrid, burning his nostrils, and despite the taste of stomach acid still present in his mouth, he knew that it would be best to get used to it. The torture was only starting. The disgusting taste from Applejack's tongue entering his mouth was still there as well. It was as if she were trying to suffocate him with her tongue that tasted like rotten apples. She had stuck her tongue so far into his mouth that it was nearly down his throat, and even Crimson knew that this wasn't the only time he'd have to deal with Applejack's cruel sexual behavior. He was sure that he'd be facing much worse. The question was, how much worse would it get? Crimson then knew what the other smell was that he could smell. It was the smell of sex, a scent that he had only experienced once in his short life when he had lost his virginity. The thought of him being forced to have intercourse with one of the demented Apple family members caused his entire body to quiver, following his limbs attempting to shake free of the restraints. There was no use in trying to break free of the metal restraints, seeing the restraints were solid steel. He started to retch, but nothing came out, due to there being nothing left. If intercourse was part of the torture, what else would he have to face? He'd soon find out. Crimson was awoke by the sound of the slaughterhouse door opening, hearing Applejack's hooves against the concrete floor, making her way up the stairs to him, until she stood face to face with him. She was holding a plate with her right hoof, with some sort of content on the plate's surface. Crimson was too weak to even open his eyes, so Applejack gave him a bit of a nudge. She grabbed a metal brand with the letters AF at the end of the metal bar.
"Wake up, sugar! It's time to eat!"
commanded Applejack. Crimson just remained unconscious, infuriating Applejack.
"Okay, fine. Guess we're going to have to do this the hard way,"
said Applejack, gripping the sizzling metal brand. Applejack wasted no time and thrusted the brand along the surface of Crimson's right flank. The brand sizzled against Crimson's flesh as he screamed from the brand burning his skin. The smell of burnt fur lingered, following the smell of burning flesh, as Crimson opened his eyes. His body tensed up against the metal restraints, nearly snapping his limbs. Applejack just looked up at Crimson with an annoyed look on her face.
"Good, you're awake. How dare you ignore me when I offer you food? When I tell you to open your eyes, I mean open your eyes! Unless you want to be singed by this here metal brand. Got it?"
she said. Yes, replied Crimson.
I prefer you call me your sweet Applejack. Yeah, because I am your sweet Applejack, right?
She said. Crimson did not bother arguing. Despite him calling her anything sweet made him want to gag. Applejack was growing impatient, resulting in another brand to his left flank.
Right?
She yelled. Yes, my sweet Applejack! Yelled Crimson, both his flanks burning like fire.
Oh, thank you, sugar. Now, we're going to play a game called Dinner Time,
she said playfully. Crimson did not like the sound of the game Applejack was playing with him, as he saw her pull out a large knife. He gulped from the sight of the knife. What kind of game is it, my sweet Applejack? Asked Crimson in a weak tone.
The rules are simple. All you have to do is not gag or spit out the food,
explained Applejack. Crimson looked at the food on the plate, and it looked like something that had been pulled out of a trash can and put on a plate. He wanted to gag, but refused the urge to. What if I do, my sweet Applejack? He asked, not wanting to know the answer.
I get to land a nice slow cut with this knife to wherever I desire, except neck. That would kill you. And we don't want that now, do we?
Applejack's words were like poison to Crimson. She was going to do whatever she could to torture him, while not killing him. Crimson knew that he was going to gag, because just the sight of the food was making him sick. "What exactly is on the plate?" asked Crimson.
Well, I told you earlier, just before I left, but seeing you're low on hearing, I'll repeat myself. It's apple liver.
Immediately, Crimson gagged, changing Applejack's mood from pleased to angry.
Gagging already? That's not very nice.
She said, cutting him slowly across the upper chest. Crimson screamed as blood started pouring out of the open wound. Applejack placed a bucket beneath him to catch the blood, seeing that was what he was being used for. Crimson attempted to stop screaming, but was silenced by Applejack instead, shoving a piece of the apple liver into his mouth. The taste of it immediately caused Crimson to gag, resulting in another cut just above the abdominal area. Once again, blood came gushing out of the wound as Crimson started to scream and quiver. Applejack was growing tired of Crimson's screaming.
Won't you shut up?
She snapped, hitting him across the face with her right hoof. Crimson spat out some blood, landing in the bucket below, along with some tooth fragments.
You don't stop your screaming, I'll resort to something I know you won't enjoy, but I will!
Applejack's words spiked Crimson's mind, remembering the smell of sex being present. He knew very well what she was talking about, so he either had to somehow get past her sick dinner games, or would be forced to have sex with her. He immediately silenced himself, looking into Applejack's eyes, seeing only pure evil.
I see you're caught on. Now open wide, sugar, unless you prefer the other option,
said Applejack with a smirk. Crimson opened his mouth as Applejack shoved another bite of the horrid apple liver into his mouth. The taste was horrible, but he somehow managed to swallow the content without gagging.
How is it?
She asked. "Delicious, my sweet Applejack," he lied.
Such a sweet one. Hear that, Grimdark? He says it's delicious,
she said, preparing another bite. Applejack laughed, shoving another bite into Crimson's mouth. Crimson had become fond of the taste, so it didn't bother him anymore. It tasted disgusting, but it was better than envisioning himself having intercourse with one of the Apple family's own kin. After multiple bites, Applejack had grown bored, seeing Crimson was actually doing what she said. The apple liver was gone, which was a relief to Crimson. This torture section was finally over, or at least he thought it was, until Applejack stood inches from his face. She stared at him with a seductive grin. "What are you doing, my sweet Applejack?" he asked.
Getting you ready, sugar,
she replied with an evil giggle. "Ready for what?" He had become scared, not knowing what Applejack had in store for him. A trip through the grinder just below him? More torture? She closed into him until she was up against his soft, sweat-drenched body. She rubbed up against him, breathing in his face. Her breath was warm and smelled like death, similar to the sack that had been placed over his head.
I'm going to take you on a ride you'll never forget,
she whispered into his ear. "What are you talking about, my sweet Applejack?" he asked, confused on what she had planned.
Look down,
she said. Crimson looked down as she said, not wanting to risk anything, only to immediately figure out what she was talking about. He had an erection, caused from her rubbing against him. "No, please," he begged.
Too late, sugar. Looks like your body wants it,
she said, getting into position. Applejack laughed, but she got on all four hooves and shoved his genitals into her vagina. She moved back and forth, hearing Crimson's pleas for her to stop, even starting to cry. His heart rate caused more blood to leak out of the wounds Applejack had cut into Crimson Flash, leaking down his body and into the bucket, as Applejack continued to move back and forth. The cries for her to stop only made her speed up, until finally, she felt Crimson climax in her. That wasn't enough for her, so she continued to move back and forth, feeling herself start to come close to climax. It wasn't much longer as she sped up and finally climaxed, moving forward and spraying all of her body liquids onto Crimson Flash. She even managed to get some into his mouth, causing him to gag. Applejack stopped him right there.
Swallow it,
she commanded. Crimson could not do anything, so he just listened to Applejack and swallowed her body liquid.
Now, don't cry. There will be plenty more of that in time,
she said, gathering up the plate and watching as the final bit of blood dripped from Crimson's body into the bucket.
Sweet dreams, sugar,
said Applejack, French kissing Crimson. Once she finished her cruel sexual act, she made her way out of the slaughterhouse. Once she was out of sight, Crimson resumed to crying. He knew it wasn't his fault, but what could he do? Applejack had claimed she'd be forcing him to have sex with her even more. His mind was blank as he passed out from the thoughts of the dirty deed Applejack had just done. The next morning, Crimson peeked his eyes open, confused on where he was at first, but once he came to realization on what had happened the previous day, his confusion disappeared. The entire night, he had been dead weight in the metal restraints, causing his limbs to ache. He didn't know if that was an intended step in the torture, but nonetheless, it was painful. Crimson braced himself upward, using any bit of strength he had left in him, wondering what Applejack had in store for breakfast. He was incredibly dehydrated and needed some water, due to his mouth being completely dry with only the taste of vomit, rotten apples, and even the apple liver he was forced to eat. The cuts that Applejack had made on his upper and lower chest looked infected, and it wouldn't surprise Crimson if they were, seeing the knife was probably used on many other past victims for many other methods of torture designed to slowly kill the victim. The thoughts of the methods made him shiver, causing his limbs to surge in pain from them pounding against the hard steel. After a few minutes, he attempted to calm himself, hearing the sound of only the wind creeping through holes in the barnwood, and the row of saw blades below him creaking from the wind's force. He had never felt so weak in his entire life, and Crimson had had many weak moments in his short life of 19 years. Crimson was born in the local Ponyville hospital and weighed the usual weight of a newborn foal. His mother, Hazel Flash, had gone through a 20-hour labor until finally the time had come for Crimson to be born. His father, Maroon Flash, was a hard-working stallion that had a full-time job in a faraway place, and due to his occupation, could not attend his own son's birth. Hazel understood the reason, due to them being a poor family and needing money in order to keep a roof over their heads. Everything was working out fine, until one day an accident occurred on Maroon's work site, and the result was over 20 ponies ending up in the hospital with severe injuries, while a mere 5 lost their lives in the accident. Maroon was one of those 5 ponies, immediately causing everything to go south for the Flash family. The fatality devastated Hazel, while young Crimson was too young to even know what was going on. At first, Hazel had thoughts of suicide, but knew that Crimson needed her, and suicide would only make things worse for the young foal. Times were hard, but Hazel managed to raise Crimson into a healthy Earth pony. Once again, everything seemed to be back on track, until the first alarm rang from Sweet Apple Acres. The Apple family arrived, but no pony knew of the horrors that happened beyond the barn doors, so no pony suspected anything. The Apples arrived, asking if any pony could lend them a hoof at the farm, due to Big Macintosh being sick. No pony suspected anything, so 5 ponies volunteered to help out at the farm. One of those 5 were Hazel. Time passed. Crimson waited for his mother to return, but she never came. The following day, Applejack came alone and lied through her teeth that there had been a terrible accident on the farm. Every pony believed her, seeing her story was believable. She claimed that the ponies were helping to lift bales of hay, and just out of nowhere, the hay pile was tipped over and landed on the ponies that had volunteered, snapping their necks and killing them. Seeing it was a common farm accident, no pony thought otherwise. That was, until a filly who had snuck onto the wagon told the real truth of what had really happened. The ponies were unsure to believe Apple Bloom or not, seeing she had always had a wild imagination. But from the descriptions that she had given in the true story, it was beyond anything a filly as young as Apple Bloom should even know about. The words were still burned into Crimson's mind.
She's lying! My sister, along with Big Mac and Granny Smith, slaughtered those ponies! The new grinder that her family just purchased isn't meant to grind up apples. It's meant to grind up ponies after they're tortured in the most horrible ways possible. Believe me when I say this. Don't listen to my sick and twisted sister. She's evil!
Apple Bloom's testimony against Applejack was literally unbelievable, until the Ponyville inhabitants watched as Applejack's true colors were revealed. After the testimony, Applejack kicked Apple Bloom so hard it broke her small rib cage, while she called Apple Bloom a no-good, disgusting, rotten apple. Apple Bloom pleaded for mercy, but through her pleas, Applejack did the unthinkable in front of Ponyville. She placed her hoof on Apple Bloom's small neck and pressured down on it until there was a snap sound that would haunt every pony's eardrums for the rest of their lives. Ever since, Ponyville has been in fear of the Apple family, unable to do anything about the family's twisted killing lifestyle. The ponies tried to leave Ponyville, but had been stopped each time by other members of the Apple family. The inhabitants of Ponyville were literally trapped and had nowhere to go, except to their deaths when their time came. Crimson's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening below him. He could have only assumed that it was Applejack, coming to feed him something terrible for breakfast. What sick and twisted game was she planning this time? Crimson didn't have to wait long, as Applejack walked up the flight of stairs, carrying a plate of what looked like pancakes. Strangely, they didn't look gross, only delicious.
Morning, sugar. How was your night?
She said in a normal tone. Her behavior was not of a psychopath, but just of a normal pony. This had to be another sick game that Applejack was playing. He didn't want to risk anything, so he quickly answered Applejack. It was okay, my sweet Applejack. He lied. Applejack expressed a normal smile. Crimson was having a hard time figuring out if Applejack was just playing with his emotions, or if she was actually being nice.
That's good. It's usually, it was horrible, let me go, or you're crazy.
She said, preparing a bite for Crimson. Can I ask something, my sweet Applejack? Asked Crimson.
Usually I'm the one that's supposed to do that, but I suppose one question wouldn't hurt.
Replied Applejack. Crimson looked at her, confused. Yesterday, she was branding his flanks, drowning him, slicing him open if he gagged, breaking his bones, and even forcing him to have sex. Now, here she was, the same Applejack, being polite. Crimson couldn't let his guard down, though. The Apple family was very cunning, and knew how to give their prey false hope. She had to be playing with him. But what sort of game? Was she playing a bipolar game?
Well, are you going to ask, or just sit there all day with a stupid look on your face?
Asked Applejack. Sorry, my sweet Applejack.
It's fine, just ask already.
Crimson didn't want to push his limits, so he went on with his question. Something no pony knew. I'd just like to know, what made your family become murderers? He asked, gulping. Applejack looked at him funny, then proceeded to answering.
Finally, a question that no pony has ever asked.
She said. Crimson was shocked. No pony ever asked that? He said.
Nope.
Claimed Applejack. Well, said Crimson.
I'll tell you while you're eating your pancakes for me. Is that fair?
I suppose, he said, as Applejack shoved a bite into his dry mouth.
Well, it all started one day during apple bucking season. It was a normal day, nothing different. I was finishing up in the orchard and my back hooves felt like they were full of lead. I finished bucking the final tree when I suddenly felt a surge of pain throughout my back legs. It was no surprise to me, seeing I faced multiple sprains before, but this one was different. My hooves were bruised and starting to crack. To help settle the pain, I sat down against a tree and relaxed my back hooves on the apple basket.
The story interested Crimson as he ate the pancakes, not noticing anything bad about the pancakes, only that they tasted like regular pancakes. Applejack continued with the story.
I thought it was empty, but it turns out there was one apple in that basket. I had no idea that my hooves were bleeding and the blood had actually soaked the apple, until I decided to have myself a bit of a snack. The day was so overwhelming, I wasn't even paying attention to the blood on the apple and took a large bite out of the apple. At first, the apple tasted like iron due to the amount of blood in the apple. I was about to spit out until I mixed the blood with the sweet juice of the apple. That's when it happened, and I tasted more and more, only for me to love the taste.
Applejack stopped for a moment, shoving another bite into Crimson's mouth. Crimson knew that could not be the only reason. How did she get her family to agree with this lifestyle? My sweet Applejack, how did you get the others involved? He asked.
That's what comes next. I knew this could be the discovery that could save our farm, seeing Sweet Apple Acres was tight on money and literally falling apart. However, I knew I had to convince Big Mac and Granny Smith another way. So I came up with a plan. To get most of the iron taste out of the apple, I sliced the apple into slices and blended it together until it was in the applesauce. I presented it to Big Mac and Granny Smith as a dessert one night while keeping Apple Bloom out of it, seeing she was the biggest loudmouth around.
Crimson knew very well what Applejack was referring to, hearing the sound of Apple Bloom's neck snapping echo in his mind. The sound made him quiver as Applejack continued.
They all tried it and loved the taste. Not long after trying the applesauce, I revealed what the special ingredient was that gave it that special taste. As expected, Big Mac and Granny Smith were surprised and wondered if it was worth it. As a start, I volunteered to donate the blood for the applesauce. And seeing I'm old enough to make my own decisions, Big Mac and Granny Smith had no way to stop me. Everything was going just fine, and no pony knew my own blood was in the applesauce, until I was caught in the act. I was at a rodeo selling the applesauce, and as usual, ran out of applesauce, seeing it was a high seller. When I got the chance, I moved to an area where I thought I wouldn't be seen, and pulled out a pocket knife so I could cut myself. Once I made the cut and started bleeding it into a jar, a local rodeo pony walked near my hiding spot and was caught. No pony was ever supposed to find out the secret ingredient, so it had to be done.
Crimson felt a chill run down his spine as Applejack continued.
The pony looked at me as I pulled the knife out toward him. They did the usual speech. Oh, I swear I won't tell any pony. But I knew that was a dead lie. So I grabbed my lasso, wrapped him up, and finally slit their throat.
The story had just taken a scary turn, and Crimson knew that they had to be coming close to the end. Applejack continued, shoving the few remaining bites of the pancakes into Crimson's mouth. He still couldn't tell the type of game Applejack was playing.
Once I saw the amount of blood gushing out of the pony, I knew wouldn't be able to provide the required amount of blood for the applesauce, and the production was too great to just call it quits. I grabbed the jar I had, placed it by the pony's neck, and within seconds, I already had enough blood for over 20 jars. That's when it hit me. Maybe me alone wasn't enough, but with some persuasion and trickery, we could use other ponies for the production of the applesauce, and y'all know the rest from there.
Applejack had finished, and Crimson could not believe what he had just heard. Applejack could have started a secret blood donation program or something rather than taking a dark and grim path. He was shaking a little, which Applejack noticed.
Ah, no no need to be frightened, sugar. Like I said when you first arrived, we had many plans for you, especially me.
She said in a sarcastic tone. Crimson was expecting the worst, but instead, Applejack just gave him a wink and gathered up the plate and fork. Immediately, Crimson was confused, until she placed a bucket beneath his body, meaning he was about to lose some blood. His heart rate started to speed up, not knowing what was coming next. The nice Applejack was gone, and Psychopath Applejack was back. Applejack grabbed the knife from the plate, which he recognized as the same knife from the previous night. "What are you doing, my sweet Applejack?" he asked. She gave him a sinister giggle, then proceeded to what she had planned.
Oh, it's so cute you call me sweet when I'm cold as ice, sugar. We gotta get y'all opened up.
She said in a low tone. Applejack's words made his heart drop as she took the tip of the large knife and cut it straight down from the upper chest wound to the one on his lower chest. Crimson screamed from the blade's slow movement. Applejack was making sure that Crimson felt every bit of the pain, cutting at an accurate speed. The knife hit many nerves, causing him to jump. Each time he jumped, the blade would sink deeper into his flesh, causing him to start breathing heavily and scream more and more. Applejack finished the cut, then watched as tons came gushing out of the open wound. It fell into the bucket below, creating a low thumping sound against the metal surface of the bucket. Crimson felt as if he was done for, but the incision that Applejack had made was not enough to kill him. As the blood fell into the bucket, Applejack added to the torture and reopened the wounds she had made with the knife the night before, causing more blood to gush out of Crimson's body into the bucket below. Crimson was close to passing out. Applejack noticed the young pony slowly starting to pass out and slapped him hard across the face, keeping him awake.
Now, we can't have you falling asleep when I'm going to need you wide awake while I close the wound,
she said evilly. She turned away from him, only to turn around and slap him hard across the face.
Tell me I'm sweet.
She commanded, slapping him again. Crimson struggled to stay conscious, causing Applejack to get irritated.
Tell me I'm sweet.
She commanded, hitting him harder than before. You're... Applejack slapped him again, giving the same command. You're...
I can't hear you.
She shouted into his ear. You're... sweet, muttered Crimson. Applejack punched him so hard in the face that it knocked some of his teeth out.
Louder! You said it multiple times before, so why can't you say it now?
Commanded Applejack, already pulling her hoof back for another punch. You're sweet! He yelled with every bit of strength that he had.
See? Was that so hard?
She said calmly. Just when Crimson thought it was safe, Applejack punched him again, this time hard enough to knock him out.
Oh, but I'm not sweet. I'm your worst nightmare.